The night before Christmas Eve, I showed up unannounced. Snow was falling hard in Ohio, and the air was sharp enough to cut through bone. My boots crunched against the frozen driveway, and my son Stephen walked beside me, his jaw clenched tight. We weren't supposed to be here, but something inside me told me I had to come. And then I saw her. My granddaughter Abigail was standing outside, shivering, her little hands tucked under her thin dress. No jacket, no hoodie. Her lips were turning blue, and the breath leaving her mouth came out in heavy clouds. She looked so small, so fragile, like a forgotten toy left out in the storm. Inside, through the frosted window, I saw warmth. I saw a golden glow from the fireplace. I saw plates stacked with food, turkey, pies, glasses of wine. I saw people laughing, clinking glasses, and passing around gifts. My daughter-in-law Angela's family was inside, toasting each other, their voices rising with cheer. And my Abigail was outside, alone, freezing. Something inside me broke. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Stephen's arm, shoved the front door open so hard it slammed against the wall, and the room fell silent. Everyone turned, their smiles frozen, forks paused halfway to their mouths. The warmth from inside hit Abigail's small body as she stumbled in behind us, teeth chattering. I stepped into the center of the living room, looked every one of them dead in the eye, and with Stephen standing tall beside me, I said just 8 unforgettable words. You left my granddaughter outside in the cold. The laughter died instantly. Forks clinked onto plates. Someone dropped a glass, and it shattered on the floor. Angela's face went pale, her family shifting uncomfortably, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But before anyone could answer, before anyone could make excuses or lies, I took another step forward, and the tension in that room grew so heavy it could have snapped the Christmas tree in half. And that's when. Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Let me know where you're watching from. You might just be lucky enough to get a shout out in our next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you love stories like this one. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, so you understand how we reached this moment. My name is Vivian. I've lived in Ohio all my life. Winters here are brutal, but so is life when the people you love betray your kindness. For years, I thought my family was strong, unshakable, the kind of family that others looked up to. But life has a cruel way of showing you the truth. When my son Stephen married Angela, I welcomed her with open arms. She was beautiful, smart, and seemed to adore Stephen. At first, she treated me kindly too, always smiling, always saying the right things. I thought she was the daughter I never had. But over time, the mask slipped. Angela came from a proud family, people who believed wealth and status mattered more than love or compassion. They whispered about how Stephen married down, since we weren't as well off. At dinners, they'd cut me off mid-sentence, brushing me aside as if my years of wisdom counted for nothing. They laughed at the way I dressed, the way I spoke, the small gifts I brought for Abigail. I swallowed it, every insult, every look, because I didn't want to ruin things for Stephen, because I loved my granddaughter. But then things changed. Angela's family started hosting every holiday, every birthday, every gathering. They stopped inviting me, except when it was convenient for them to show off that Stephen's mom had been included. Even then, I noticed they never made room for me at the main table. I was always at the corner, close to the kitchen, as if I was just another helper. Still, I endured it, because of Abigail. Sweet, gentle Abigail, who would run into my arms whenever she saw me, whispering, "Grandma, I love you." I told myself it was worth it, until the night before Christmas Eve. That evening, I had called Stephen. Something in my heart told me things weren't right. He didn't want to answer at first, but when he finally picked up, his voice was heavy. I asked him where Abigail was, and he said, at Angela's parents' place. I asked him if she was happy. His silence told me everything. That silence is what made me grab my coat, pull Stephen into the car, and drive through the snow. I didn't care that we weren't invited. I didn't care if Angela's family looked down on me. I just knew my granddaughter needed me. And when I saw her, blue-lipped and trembling outside that house while the people inside stuffed themselves with food and wine, something inside me burned like fire. I couldn't hold it in. I stormed inside, dragging the storm with me. And that's when the moment happened. The 8 words that cut sharper than the winter wind. You left my granddaughter outside in the cold. The room shifted. Faces turned white. The holiday cheer was gone, replaced by shame, fear, and something else I couldn't yet name. But just as the silence swallowed us whole, the room was frozen in silence after I spoke. Abigail clung to my arm, her small fingers trembling as if she was afraid someone might drag her back outside. Stephen stood tall beside me, his jaw set like stone, eyes scanning every face in the room. Angela's mother, Patricia, was the first to speak. She forced a smile, though her cheeks twitched, betraying the nerves underneath. "Vivian," she said slowly, as though she were handling a wild animal, "this isn't what it looks like." I narrowed my eyes at her. "Then tell me, Patricia, what does it look like? Because from where I stood outside, it looks like you were eating and drinking while a little girl nearly froze to death." Angela's father, Richard, set his wine glass down so hard the base cracked against the table. "You don't march into my house making accusations," he snapped. His voice boomed, but his words shook with unease. Stephen took one step forward. "She's my daughter," he said, voice low but carrying weight. No one gets to treat her like that. Not even you." Angela finally spoke. Her tone was sharp, defensive, but her eyes darted toward her family as though she was afraid of what they might think. "She wasn't outside that long. You're overreacting. We just told her to wait a few minutes while we—" I cut her off. A few minutes in that cold could be the difference between life and death for a child. My voice cracked with rage, and for a second even Angela looked startled. "Do you have any idea what it means to love someone enough to protect them from the smallest harm? Because right now it looks like you don't." The Christmas tree lights flickered in the corner as if the house itself felt the tension. Abigail's teeth chattered, and I wrapped my scarf around her shoulders. No one moved to help. No one moved at all. For a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. Then, from the corner, a laugh broke the silence. It came from Igor, Angela's older cousin, the kind of man who thrived on cruelty disguised as humor. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "This is rich," he said. "All this drama over a kid standing outside for a bit. Maybe she needed some fresh air. Don't be so dramatic, Grandma." The words sliced through me like knives. Abigail flinched and buried her face in my coat, ashamed, as if his mockery was her fault. That was when Stephen lost it. He slammed his fist down on the table, so hard the plates rattled and everyone jumped. "Do not talk about my daughter like that." His voice was thunder, raw and unshakable. The room rippled with unease. Richard stood up, ready to bark back, but Patricia grabbed his arm, whispering something to him quickly. Angela's face went pale, caught between defending her family and facing the truth of what she'd allowed to happen. Abigail's soft whimper pulled me back. I looked down at her flushed face, her damp eyes, and something inside me hardened into steel. This was not going to be brushed off. Not tonight. Not ever. "Angela," I said, my voice lower now but colder, sharper. "Look at your daughter. Look at her lips. Look at her shaking. And tell me, how could you let this happen?" Angela opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her face was blank, her eyes darting, searching for someone else to answer for her. No one spoke. No one moved. And that's when the front door creaked open again. The cold wind rushed in, snowflakes swirling through the hallway like a warning. Every head in the room turned toward the door, and a figure stepped inside. The sight of him made Angela's family's faces twist in shock, because he wasn't supposed to be here. The door groaned against the wind as it swung open, and a rush of icy air whipped through the living room. The candles flickered, the Christmas tree ornaments jingled softly against each other, and Abigail buried her face deeper into my coat. A tall figure stepped inside, brushing snow off his shoulders. His boots thudded against the hardwood floor, leaving wet marks in their path. It was Joshua, Stephen's younger brother, my second son. For a second, my heart nearly stopped. We hadn't seen Joshua in over 2 years. He had left Ohio after a brutal fallout with Angela's family, one that nearly tore our entire household apart. None of us expected to see him again. Not here, not tonight. Angela's face went sheet white. Patricia gasped softly, clutching her pearls as though she'd seen a ghost. Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Joshua glanced around the room, his gaze sharp, cutting into each face one by one before finally landing on Abigail shivering in my arms. His lips pressed into a thin line, his nostrils flaring as he took in the sight. "Are you kidding me?" Joshua's voice was low, dangerous. "You left her outside?" The room broke into chaos. Patricia rushed to explain herself, talking over Angela, who was stammering excuses. Richard raised his voice, shouting something about boundaries and not your business. Igor snickered again from the corner, trying to rile things up further. But Joshua didn't care. His eyes locked on Abigail, and his voice rose like fire. "She's just a child. A child. And you sit in here feasting like kings while she freezes." Angela finally snapped. "Don't you dare come in here and judge us, Joshua. You don't even live here anymore. You don't know what's been going on." Joshua's laugh was humorless. "I know enough. I know you don't deserve to call yourself a mother if this is how you treat your daughter." Angela flinched as though he'd struck her. The room went dead silent again, and all eyes shifted between Joshua and Angela. Stephen took a step toward his brother, but not to stop him. For the first time in years, the two of them stood side by side, united. I felt something stir in my chest, a bittersweet mix of pain and pride. Richard cleared his throat, trying to reclaim control of the room. "This is ridiculous. She wasn't in danger. We're not monsters. It's freezing outside, sure, but she was only out there for a little while." "A little while?" Joshua's voice thundered, louder than even Stephen's had been. "Would you leave your own daughter out there? Would you leave Angela out there? Patricia." He pointed sharply toward the frosted window. "Step outside without a coat for 5 minutes, and then tell me it's nothing. Go ahead." The words hit their mark. Richard's face reddened, and for once he had no reply. Angela bit her lip, looking around desperately for support. Her family shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Not even Igor this time. Abigail whimpered softly, her teeth chattering again. That sound cut through all the noise, sharper than any word could. I looked around the room and felt my anger harden into something unshakable. For years, I had let this family walk over me, humiliate me, push me into corners just to keep peace. But not anymore. Not after this. I pulled Abigail closer, feeling the heat of her small body pressed against me. Then I looked up, straight at Angela, and said in a voice steady enough to slice through stone, "This ends tonight." Angela froze. Patricia's hand dropped from her pearls. Joshua and Stephen turned to me, eyes wide, waiting for what would come next. And then, without warning, the sound of glass shattering rang out behind us. Someone had thrown a wine bottle, and it smashed against the floor, sending shards flying across the living room. The chaos was about to erupt again. The wine bottle exploded against the hardwood floor, red liquid spreading like blood across the polished surface. The sharp scent of alcohol filled the air, mixing with the smell of roasted turkey and pine from the Christmas tree. Abigail screamed, burying her face against my chest as shards of glass skittered toward our feet. Everyone jumped back, except Igor. He stood there smirking, one hand still raised from the careless throw. "Oops," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Guess my hand slipped." Stephen lunged forward, fury blazing in his eyes, but Joshua grabbed his arm just in time. "Not yet," Joshua muttered. "That's what he wants." Igor leaned back casually against the wall, arms crossed, his smirk widening. "Look at this circus. 2 brothers barging in here, grandma playing hero, and all because a kid was outside for a bit. You people are pathetic." The word stung. But what stung more was the laughter that broke from a few of Angela's cousins seated at the far end of the table. Quiet at first, nervous giggles that soon grew bolder as Igor egged them on. Patricia snapped her head toward them. "Enough," she hissed, her voice sharp with anger. But it was too late. The damage was done. Stephen shook off Joshua's grip, his face red with rage. "You think this is a game, Igor? She's a child. My child. And you throw glass around like it's funny? What if it cut her?" Igor's smirk faltered just a little. "Relax. Nothing happened." I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the tension. That's the problem with all of you. You wait until something terrible happens before you care. A child doesn't need to bleed for you to wake up. She doesn't need to collapse before you realize she's freezing. Love means protecting before it's too late. The laughter died instantly. Even Patricia lowered her eyes, shame flashing across her face. Angela's hands trembled at her sides. "Vivian, please," she whispered, her voice thin. "Not here. Not in front of everyone." I turned to her, my anger softening into something else. Something heavier. "Not here? Not now. Then when, Angela? How many more nights does Abigail have to suffer for you to stand up for her?" For a heartbeat, Angela looked like she might break. Her lips parted, her eyes glistened. But then Richard slammed his fist against the table. "This has gone far enough," he barked. "This is my house. My rules. If you don't like how things are done here, the door is right there." He pointed at the entrance, his voice booming with finality. Stephen bristled. Joshua clenched his fists. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. I adjusted the scarf around Abigail's shoulders and looked Richard straight in the eye. "Then maybe," I said slowly, "this house isn't where my granddaughter belongs." The words hit like a thunderclap. Angela gasped, covering her mouth. Patricia's face drained of color. Even Igor's smirk faded completely. "You wouldn't dare," Richard growled. But before anyone could respond, Abigail coughed, a harsh, rattling sound that cut through all the shouting. Her tiny body shook in my arms, her skin clammy, her breath uneven. Everyone froze. The argument, the anger, the pride, all of it vanished in an instant as the truth slammed down like a hammer. Abigail wasn't just cold anymore. She was sick. The sound of Abigail's cough silenced the entire room. It wasn't the kind of cough you brush off, either. It was deep, rattling, and wet, the kind that made her small chest heave and her shoulders tremble. Every breath came out as a wheeze, visible in the faint puff of air escaping her lips. My heart dropped. Fear gripped me in a way that anger never could. I pulled her closer, brushing a hand against her forehead. She was burning hot despite her shivering. Her body was trying desperately to fight the cold, but it was clear she was losing. "Abigail," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Baby, breathe slow. Grandma's here." Angela's eyes went wide, her hands shaking as she stepped forward. What's wrong with her?" she stammered. Joshua shot her a look so sharp it could have cut glass. "What's wrong?" he barked. "What's wrong is you left her outside in freezing temperatures. Angela. What did you expect?" Angela flinched, her gaze dropping to the floor, but Stephen wasn't looking at her. He was already fumbling for his phone. "We need to take her to the hospital. Now." "No," Richard said sharply, his voice still trying to carry authority even as panic flickered in his eyes. "You're overreacting. She just caught a chill. She'll be fine once she warms up." Stephen's head snapped toward him. "Overreacting?" His voice shook with fury. "My daughter can barely breathe, and you think we're overreacting?" He jabbed a finger toward the door. "Move, or I swear I'll move you myself." For the first time that night, Richard didn't bark back. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Maybe even he realized that his power in this house meant nothing in the face of a sick child. Patricia, usually the peacemaker, stepped forward timidly. We can put her by the fire," she suggested, her voice trembling. "Get her some tea, a blanket. She'll recover faster at home." Joshua spun on her, his voice sharp as a blade. "Tea? A blanket? Patricia, look at her. This isn't a mild chill. She could have hypothermia. Do you want to be responsible for what happens if we waste another second?" The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Patricia's face paled, and she stumbled back, her hands wringing nervously. I didn't wait for them to argue further. I looked at Stephen, my voice firm, decisive. "Get the car ready." He nodded without hesitation, already moving toward the door. Abigail coughed again, her little body spasming in my arms. Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. She needed strength, not weakness. Angela reached out, her voice trembling. "Mom, let me hold her. Please. She's my daughter." I hesitated, looking into her desperate eyes. For the first time that night, Her mask of pride and indifference was gone. What I saw instead was fear. Genuine fear. But fear wasn't enough. Love required action, and she had failed at that when it mattered most. I adjusted Abigail in my arms and shook my head. Not tonight. She stays with me. Angela's lips quivered, but she didn't argue. She let her hands fall to her sides, and the silence that followed cut deeper than any words could. We hurried out into the snow, Stephen pulling the car up as close as he could. Joshua opened the back door for me, his strong hand steady as I climbed in with Abigail cradled against me. The cold air stung my cheeks, but my focus was on her shallow breaths. "Stay with me, sweetheart," I whispered, stroking her damp hair. "Grandma's not letting anything happen to you." As Stephen started the car, tires crunching against the icy driveway, I glanced back at the house. Angela stood in the doorway, her figure small and broken against the warm glow of the lights behind her. Patricia clung to Richard's arm, whispering furiously, but his face was unreadable. Igor still leaned against the wall inside, smirking faintly, though his eyes betrayed something, unease, maybe even guilt. I turned away. None of them mattered right now. Abigail did. The drive to the hospital was tense. The roads were slick, snowflakes hammering against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. Stephen's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Joshua sat in the passenger seat, glancing back every few seconds to check on us. Abigail coughed again, her body trembling violently. I wrapped my coat tighter around her, whispering soft reassurances even though my own heart was racing. Each cough felt like a dagger. "Drive faster," Joshua urged. "I'm going as fast as I can," Stephen shot back, frustration bleeding into his voice. "The roads are ice. If we skid, we won't make it at all." They fell into silence again, the only sound Abigail's uneven breathing and the hum of the engine straining against the storm. Finally, after what felt like hours, the bright red glow of the hospital's emergency sign cut through the snow. Relief washed over me, though fear still gnawed at my chest. We pulled up to the entrance, and Joshua rushed out, yelling for help. 2 nurses came running with a wheelchair, their faces tightening as soon as they saw Abigail. "Get her inside. Quick," one of them barked. I gently laid her onto the chair, my hands reluctant to let go. The nurse gave me a reassuring nod. "We'll take care of her." But as they wheeled her away, Abigail's small hand reached back, clutching my sleeve. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Grandma, don't leave." Tears finally spilled down my cheeks. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, whispering, "I'm right here, baby." Always. Stephen and Joshua flanked me as we followed her into the sterile, bright-lit halls. Every second felt like a lifetime. Hours passed in that waiting room. Stephen paced the floor, his face tight with worry. Joshua sat in the corner, his leg bouncing, his fists clenched. I clasped my hands together and prayed silently, my heart heavy with fear and anger all at once. Finally, a doctor appeared, his expression unreadable as he approached. "She's stable," he said at last. Relief flooded through me so quickly my knees nearly buckled. "She has early signs of pneumonia, likely caused by the exposure to the cold. You got her here just in time. Any longer, and it could have been much worse." I closed my eyes, whispering a silent thank you. "She'll need to stay here for observation," the doctor continued. "But she's strong. With the right care, she'll recover." Stephen let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping in relief. Joshua ran a hand over his face, muttering, "Thank God." But even as relief filled the room, another weight settled over me. This wasn't just about Abigail getting sick. This was about how she ended up outside in the first place, about the family who thought so little of her, and of us, that they let it happen. And I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Because come Christmas Eve, Angela's family would learn what it meant to underestimate a grandmother's love. The morning of Christmas Eve broke with a pale sun straining through heavy gray clouds, the kind that looked swollen with more snow. The storm had quieted overnight, but the air was still sharp and brittle, the kind of cold that sank into your bones. I hadn't slept. None of us had. The 3 of us, Stephen, Joshua, and I, sat in Abigail's hospital room, each of us keeping vigil as though our very presence might shield her from harm. Machines beeped softly in the background, and the sterile white walls felt suffocating, but I wouldn't leave her side. She looked so small in that bed, her cheeks flushed pink from fever, her breathing steady but shallow. An oxygen tube rested under her nose, and the sight of it broke something inside me. This was supposed to be Christmas, a time for joy and laughter, not for hospitals and worry. Stephen sat hunched forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together tightly. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. Joshua leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, but his usually cool expression was cracked, worry seeping through every time his gaze landed on Abigail. "She's stronger than she looks," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "She always has been." Stephen nodded weakly. "She gets that from you, Mom." His voice was hoarse, choked with emotion. Silence hung heavy after that. The only sound was the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the occasional cough from Abigail as she stirred in her sleep. But as the hours crawled by, my fear began to transform into something else. Anger. Not the quick, fiery anger that had driven me into that house the night before, but a cold, simmering fury that settled deep into my chest. Angela's family had laughed and feasted while Abigail froze. They had mocked, dismissed, and belittled us. And if fate had been just a little less merciful, my granddaughter could have been taken from us forever. That was something I couldn't forgive. And I knew one thing. Christmas Eve would not pass quietly. By late afternoon, Abigail's color had returned slightly, her fever lowering under the careful watch of the nurses. She stirred, blinking up at me with tired eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice soft and raspy. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said quickly, squeezing her small hand. "Are we going to have Christmas?" she asked, her lips trembling slightly. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I forced a smile. "Yes, baby, we're going to have Christmas. A Christmas you'll never forget." She smiled faintly before drifting back into sleep. And at that moment, I knew what had to be done. Stephen stepped into the hallway with me, while Joshua stayed behind with Abigail. The hall was quiet, the faint echo of footsteps bouncing off the linoleum floors. "Mom," Stephen said, his voice low, "what are you thinking?" I looked him in the eye, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be, the one who always wanted to do the right thing, but sometimes let others step on him. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that Angela's family needs to understand what they've done. And not with words this time. With action." Stephen hesitated. "You mean go back?" I nodded. "Yes, but not like last night. Last night, we were caught in the storm and emotions ran high. Tonight, we go back prepared. Tonight, we show them what it means to face the consequences of cruelty." His jaw tightened. "Mom, if we push this, it could destroy everything. Angela, her family, the marriage." "Stephen," I interrupted firmly, "they almost destroyed your daughter. They don't deserve peace until they face what they did." He ran a hand over his face, torn between duty as a father and fear of making things worse. But then his eyes softened and he gave a slow nod. "All right, but we do it together. No one takes Abigail's pain lightly. Not anymore." A quiet strength settled in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt my son standing beside me as more than just my child. He was a father, a protector, a man ready to defend his family. And tomorrow's Christmas Eve gathering at Angela's parents' home would not unfold the way they planned. As the evening descended, Joshua returned from making a call, his expression unreadable. "Who were you talking to?" Stephen asked. Joshua shrugged. "An old friend. Someone who owes me a favor." He didn't explain further, but the glint in his eyes told me he was planning something. Part of me worried. Joshua's methods had always been sharper, more aggressive than Stephen's, but another part of me welcomed it. If we were going to stand against Angela's family, maybe we needed both fire and ice. Later that night, while Abigail slept peacefully, we sat together in the hospital cafeteria, huddled around a plastic table. The hum of vending machines and the smell of reheated food filled the space, but none of us cared. "Here's what we know," Joshua began, his voice low. "Angela's family is having their big Christmas Eve party tonight, just like they do every year. They'll all be there, the cousins, the aunts, the uncles. Same house, Same arrogance. Stephen grimaced. And we're supposed to just walk back in there? After what happened? Joshua smirked. Exactly. Walk in unannounced like last night. Only this time we don't just talk. We show them. We make sure everyone sees who they really are. I frowned. Joshua, what are you planning? He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. Let's just say, I have a way of making sure their perfect little image doesn't survive the night. A chill ran down my spine, but before I could press further, a nurse entered the cafeteria, calling out, Family of Abigail Carter. We all shot to our feet. She's asking for her father, the nurse said kindly. She's awake again. Stephen rushed off immediately, leaving Joshua and me behind. For a moment, we sat in silence, the tension between us thick. Vivian, Joshua said finally, his tone softer now. I know you don't like the way I handle things, but you saw what they did. They'll keep doing it unless someone makes them stop. Stephen's too soft and you're too forgiving. It has to be me. I studied him carefully. His jaw was clenched, his fists tight, but beneath it all was something I hadn't expected, guilt. Joshua hadn't been there for Abigail these past 2 years, and now, it seemed, he was determined to make up for lost time. Joshua, I said gently, just promise me this. Whatever you do tonight, make sure it's for her. Not for revenge, not to prove a point. For Abigail. His eyes softened, just for a second, before hardening again. He gave a small nod. For her. By the time we returned to Abigail's room, Stephen was sitting at her bedside, holding her hand while she smiled faintly at him. The sight filled my heart with warmth, but also with resolve. Tomorrow, Christmas Eve, we would walk into that house again. But this time, it wouldn't be just about defending Abigail. It would be about exposing the truth. And as the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in silence, I knew one thing with certainty. Angela's family had no idea what storm was coming for them. The first light of Christmas morning crept through the hospital blinds, pale gold against the sterile white walls. The night before had been long, Stephen sleeping in the chair by Abigail's bed, Joshua pacing the halls restless as ever, and me with my hands folded, whispering silent prayers over and over. But now, as the sun stretched higher, the weight of fear lifted. Abigail's eyes fluttered open. She yawned, her small body curling in the sheets, then blinked up at us. Merry Christmas, she whispered, her voice still raspy but steady. Stephen shot up from his chair, his exhaustion evaporating in an instant. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. His voice cracked, but the smile that spread across his face was one I hadn't seen in years. Pure, unguarded joy. Joshua leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but even he softened, a rare grin tugging at his lips. Well, look who decided to wake up and save Christmas. Abigail giggled faintly, and the sound filled the room like bells. We had no gifts, no ribbons, no tree. Just a hospital tray table where a nurse had left a small paper cup of juice and a plastic-wrapped cookie. But when Stephen broke the cookie in half and gave it to her, Abigail's smile was brighter than any lights on Angela's family's towering tree. I don't need presents, she said, crumbs sticking to her lips. I just need you here. The words pierced Stephen straight through the heart. He knelt beside her bed, pressing his forehead to her small hand. His shoulders shook, his voice low. I'll always be here. I promise. I reached out, laying my hand on his back. It was a promise long overdue, but at least it was spoken at last. Later in the morning, while Abigail dozed again, Joshua slipped out into the hallway with his phone. Stephen followed him, suspicious, and I trailed close behind. What are you up to now? Stephen demanded. Joshua smirked, scrolling through his messages. Just checking the fallout. You didn't think I'd send that recording to only a few inboxes, did you? Stephen's face hardened. Joshua. Oh, relax. I didn't blast it on social media, yet. But let's just say a couple of local reporters, a pastor or two, and some business associates of Edward and Marjorie got an early Christmas present. Stephen rubbed his temples. You're going to burn this whole thing down. Good, Joshua shot back. They deserve it. You don't leave a kid outside to freeze and get to sip champagne like nothing happened. His words echoed down the sterile hall. I didn't stop him. Part of me wanted to, for Abigail's sake, to shield her from scandal, but another part knew Joshua was right. Actions had consequences, and Angela's family had hidden behind their wealth and power for too long. By noon, the ripple effects began. The first call came to Stephen's phone. He hesitated, then showed me the screen. It was Angela. "Answer," I said softly. He did, putting it on speaker. Her voice was frantic, hushed, as if she'd hidden herself in a corner. "Stephen, what did you do? Do you know what's happening? Reporters are calling. Dad is furious. Mom hasn't stopped crying." "You think I care?" Stephen snapped. His voice was sharp, but there was no hesitation. "You left our daughter to freeze, Angela. Freeze. And you're worried about your parents' reputation." There was a silence on the other end. Then a broken whisper. I didn't know it would go this far. Joshua barked out a laugh. "That's the problem with you people. You never think it'll go far until it does." Angela started to say something else, but Stephen hung up, his hands trembling. He looked at me, his eyes wide, almost afraid. "Mom, did I do the right thing?" I squeezed his hand. "You finally chose your daughter. That's all that matters." That afternoon, a small miracle unfolded. A nurse wheeled in a tiny Christmas tree someone had donated to the children's ward. Little paper ornaments made by volunteers hung from the branches, and at the very top was a crooked yellow star cut from construction paper. Abigail's eyes lit up when she saw it. "It's beautiful." Stephen helped her sit up so she could hang a paper snowflake she'd cut out herself with the nurse's scissors. Joshua, grumbling, tied a red ribbon near the top, and I placed a single wrapped chocolate beneath the branches. It wasn't the lavish holiday Angela's family celebrated, but it was real. It was love, and that love was enough to make Abigail whisper as she leaned against her father's chest, "Best Christmas ever." But peace never lasts long. That evening, as twilight darkened the hospital windows, the door to Abigail's room opened. We all turned at once and froze. Angela stood there. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red from crying, her coat thrown on without care. She looked nothing like the polished woman who'd stood so proudly beside her parents the night before. Stephen's entire body tensed. Joshua moved protectively closer to Abigail's bed. Angela's gaze flicked to her daughter, then to me. Her lips trembled. Can I talk to her?" The room went still, the air thick. Abigail stirred awake, blinking sleepily. "Mommy." Angela's face crumpled at the word, tears spilling down her cheeks. She stepped forward, hands shaking. But Stephen blocked her path, his voice low and firm. "Not so fast." Angela froze as Stephen's words cut the air between them. His body was rigid, his shoulders squared, and for the first time in their marriage, he wasn't shrinking under her presence. "You don't just walk in here and demand to see her," Stephen said, his voice tight with anger. "You don't get that right. Not after what you did." Angela's lips trembled. "Stephen, please. I didn't mean. Joshua's voice cracked like a whip. He stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "Didn't mean to let a child freeze outside while you stuffed your face with turkey? Didn't mean to laugh while she cried for her grandma." Angela flinched as if the words were slaps. "I wasn't laughing," she whispered, shaking her head. "I wasn't. You didn't stop it either," I said, my voice softer but sharper than any blade. "Silence is just as cruel, Angela." The room grew heavy with the weight of truth. Abigail stirred in her bed, her wide eyes darting between the adults, her small voice breaking the tension. "Mommy, are you mad at me?" Angela's whole body broke at that. She let out a sob, covering her mouth with one trembling hand. "No, baby. Never at you. I'm mad at myself. I should have fought harder for you. I should have." Stephen's jaw clenched. "Should have. Could have. But you didn't." Angela's tears flowed freely now. "I was afraid, Stephen. Afraid of disappointing them, of standing up to my parents, of losing everything. I thought if I just kept the peace, things would get better. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." Her words filled the sterile hospital air, trembling with desperation. For a flicker of a moment, the shield of polished arrogance that she always wore was gone. What stood in front of us wasn't Angela the perfect daughter, or Angela the ambitious wife, but Angela the flawed, broken woman terrified of losing her child. Abigail's voice came again, soft and tired. I just wanted to be warm. The simplicity of it shattered every adult in the room. Angela broke completely. She dropped to her knees beside the bed, sobbing openly now. I'm sorry, Abby. I'm so sorry. I'll never let it happen again. I swear, I'll never let them hurt you again. Joshua sneered. Forgive me if I don't buy it. You're not crying for her. You're crying because your family's perfect image is in ruins. Angela turned her wet, red-rimmed eyes toward him. You don't know what it's like, Joshua. Growing up in that house, you obey or you're out. They raised me to keep quiet, to smile even when it's wrong. And her voice cracked. I carried that into my marriage. I thought silence was safer. Stephen's voice softened, but his fury didn't fade. And our daughter almost paid with her life for your silence. Angela reached for Abigail's hand, but Stephen caught her wrist midair. His voice was low, dangerous. Don't touch her. Not until I know you mean it. Angela's breath hitched. She nodded, withdrawing her trembling hand. Then tell me how to fix it. Tell me what to do. The silence that followed was thick with possibility. Abigail whispered, I just want Mommy to stay. The innocence in her words crushed Stephen. His throat worked as he looked at his daughter, then at the woman who had broken both of them. Joshua stepped closer, his voice ablade. Careful, Stephen. This is exactly how it starts again. She cries, she begs, you let her in, and the cycle repeats. Do you really want Abby to go through this twice? Angela shook her head fiercely. No, never again. I'll walk away from them if I have to. I'll leave everything behind. The money, the house, all of it. Just please let me prove it. Stephen's heart was at war. I saw it in his eyes, anger battling love, betrayal fighting against the faint ember of hope that maybe, just maybe, the woman he'd once loved could change. I touched his arm gently. Stephen, only you can decide if her words are enough. But remember, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and promises don't mean proof. His eyes closed for a moment. When they opened, he spoke with quiet steel. You don't get another chance to hurt her, Angela. One wrong move, one sign that you're putting them above Abigail again, and you're gone. For good. Angela nodded rapidly, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I understand. Abigail reached out then, her little hand brushing her mother's fingers. Angela froze, then let her daughter curl her hand into her own. For a brief, fragile moment, it seemed like something might be mending. But the moment shattered when the door burst open. A tall, broad man in a heavy coat strode in, his voice booming. Angela, there you are. Edward, her father. Behind him came Marjorie, face pinched with fury, eyes scanning the room with disdain. The air thickened instantly. Abigail's small hand recoiled back under her blanket. Stephen stepped protectively in front of her bed. Joshua's fists clenched, ready for a fight. Edward's gaze swept across us like we were vermin. We warned you not to disgrace this family, and what do? Parade your failures in public. Do you have any idea what you've done? Angela's face drained of color. Dad, please. Enough, Edward thundered. His eyes narrowed on Stephen. You think you've won something here, dragging my daughter and granddaughter into your mess? You've ruined her. You've ruined all of us. His voice dropped to a chilling growl. And I won't let you destroy this family any further. Joshua stepped forward, his jaw set. Funny. Looks like you're the one destroying it all by yourself. Edward's glare cut to him. Stay out of this, boy. You've always been nothing but trouble. But Joshua didn't flinch. Better trouble than a coward who lets a child freeze. The room exploded with tension, words flung like knives. Angela caught between her father's shadow and her daughter's fragile hope. And then Edward stepped closer, his towering frame looming over Stephen. His hand curled into a fist. Abigail whimpered softly. Daddy. Stephen braced himself. Joshua surged forward. I stepped between them, my heart pounding like a drum. And then Edward swung. The punch came fast, fueled by pride and rage. Edward's fist cut through the air toward Stephen's face. For one terrifying second, I saw the future. My son sprawled on the cold hospital floor, Abigail screaming, Angela frozen in fear. But Stephen wasn't the same man he had been months ago. He had spent years shrinking under this man's shadow, bending, breaking, apologizing. Not anymore. He ducked. Edward's fist hit the wall with a sickening thud. The plaster cracked, dust sprinkling down. A nurse walking past gasped in shock, retreating quickly to call security. Stephen straightened, his eyes blazing. You don't get to hit me. Not anymore. Edward yanked his bruised knuckles back. His face twisted in fury. You pathetic little. But before he could finish, Joshua shoved him hard, sending the older man stumbling back a step. Touch him again, and I swear you'll regret it. Marjorie rushed forward, her voice sharp. Joshua, how dare you lay hands on your elders? I turned on her, my anger erupting at last. How dare you call yourself elders when you can't even show compassion to your own blood? Elders guide. Elders protect. You hide behind wealth and cruelty. Marjorie's face flushed deep red. You know nothing about this family. Oh, I know enough, I snapped. I know a little girl almost froze because you were too proud to open a door. The words cut through the chaos. Edward, clutching his throbbing hand, glared at me with unmasked hatred. Angela stood frozen, torn between the two worlds colliding in front of her. And Abigail whimpered softly in her bed. That sound silenced everything. Stephen turned back instantly, rushing to her side, kneeling at her bedside. He stroked her hair gently, whispering, It's okay, baby. Daddy's here. Nobody's going to hurt you. Her wide eyes darted toward Edward, then back to Stephen. I don't want him here, she whispered. Angela staggered as if struck. Her gaze shot to her father, then back to her daughter. For the first time, the truth was undeniable. Abigail wasn't afraid of the cold anymore. She was afraid of her grandfather. Edward heard it too. His jaw clenched, his pride warring with something darker, a realization he couldn't control this child's heart. Ungrateful, he muttered under his breath. Just like her father. Angela's voice cracked like lightning. Stop it. The room froze. Angela's shoulders heaved, tears streaming down her face, but her voice rose louder, stronger. Stop blaming everyone else. You've controlled me my whole life, made me believe silence was safer, that obedience was love. But it isn't. It's fear. And I'm done living in fear. Edward's face turned a dangerous shade of red. Angela, you don't know what you're saying. I do, she said, her voice steadying as she turned toward Stephen. I choose them. I choose my husband, my daughter, my family. Not you. Marjorie gasped. Angela, think carefully. But Angela cut her off, her voice trembling but resolute. No, Mom. I've thought carefully my whole life, and it nearly cost me my daughter. I won't lose her to your pride. The silence after her words was deafening. Edward's chest rose and fell rapidly. His authority, his power, his control, all of it was slipping. He reached for Angela's arm, his voice low and venomous. You walk away now and you're nothing. You'll have nothing. Angela flinched, but Stephen stepped between them, his body a shield. She doesn't need your money. She doesn't need your house. And she definitely doesn't need your approval. Joshua smirked, adding the knife twist. And if you think you can bury this mess quietly, think again. That recording's already made its rounds. People know who you are now. Edward's face contorted with fury. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, 2 hospital security officers entered, drawn by the earlier commotion. Sir, one of them said firmly, we need you to leave. Now. Edward spun on them, his pride flaring. Do you know who I am? Yes, the officer replied calmly. That's exactly why we're asking you to leave. You're disturbing patients. Marjorie sputtered in indignation, but the officers held their ground. Edward, humiliated, had no choice. With a glare sharp enough to cut steel, he turned toward Angela one last time. You'll regret this. Angela's voice was quiet but steady. No, Dad. For the first time, I won't. Edward stormed out, Marjorie trailing behind him in angry silence. The door shut behind them, leaving the room heavy but lighter than it had been moments before. Angela collapsed into the chair by Abigail's bed, her sobs breaking free. Abigail reached out with her small hand, touching her mother's cheek gently. Don't cry, Mommy. Angela smiled weakly through her tears. I'll try, baby. I'll try. Stephen stood beside them, his hand resting on his daughter's blanket. His eyes met Angela's, and for the first time in a long time, there was no bitterness in his gaze, only exhaustion and the faint glimmer of hope. Joshua leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching with his usual guardedness. But even he couldn't hide the small nod of approval when Angela kissed her daughter's hand. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Edward and Marjorie weren't the type to back down quietly. But tonight, in that hospital room, something fundamental had shifted. Angela had finally chosen, and for Abigail, that choice meant everything. But as the snow thickened outside and carolers' faint voices drifted from the streets below, my heart carried one heavy thought. Edward's final words. "You'll regret this." Men like him didn't surrender. They retaliated, and I knew deep in my bones that the storm wasn't done with us yet. Snow blanketed the streets of Hartford, Connecticut, in thick sheets by morning, muffling the world in deceptive silence. Inside Abigail's hospital room, the warmth of her smile gave us the illusion of safety. Angela dozed lightly in the chair beside her daughter's bed. Stephen sat with his hand resting gently on Abigail's, and Joshua leaned against the window, eyes scanning the parking lot below. For a brief moment, it felt like peace. But peace was never something Edward allowed to last. By noon, the first blow landed. Stephen's phone buzzed with a call from his employer. He stepped into the hall to answer, and when he returned, his face was pale. "They suspended me," he said quietly, sinking into the chair across from me. They said they received an anonymous tip questioning my conduct at work. Claims about financial mismanagement." Joshua's eyes narrowed. "Anonymous? Please, that's Edward's handiwork." Stephen rubbed his forehead. "I've done nothing wrong. But in my line of work, even suspicion is enough to put me on ice." Angela stirred awake, her brows furrowing. "Wait, you're suspended? Over nothing?" He nodded grimly. "Edward knows people in the industry. All it takes is one word from him." My stomach churned. That man had nearly shattered us last night, and now he was trying to destroy Stephen's livelihood. Angela's hands balled into fists. "I'll talk to him." "No," I said firmly. "You've already given him too much of your life. Every time you try to negotiate, he tightens the leash. It's time we think differently." Joshua pushed off the wall. Differently means hitting back. Hard. Angela shook her head, her voice trembling. "But he's my father. If this escalates—" Stephen cut her off, his voice low but sharp. "It already has." The room fell silent. Even Abigail, though drowsy, seemed to sense the tension, her small fingers clutching Stephen's tightly. The next hit came the following morning. Angela's phone lit up with a message from her bank. Her accounts were frozen. "What?" she gasped, scrolling frantically. "This can't be happening." Stephen leaned over her shoulder. "All of them?" "Yes. Savings, checking, everything. He must have pulled strings." Joshua cursed under his breath. "That's not just petty. That's war." Angela's face drained of color. "He's making sure we can't stand on our own. Without money, without jobs, he thinks we'll crawl back to him." I reached for her trembling hand. "And will you?" She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with fear, but also a spark of defiance. "No, not this time." But Edward wasn't done. 3 days later, rumors began to swirl around town. People Stephen once called friends stopped answering his calls. Neighbors who once waved now turned their heads. Someone had spread a story that Stephen was abusive, that he had left Angela and Abigail outside in the snow on purpose. It was vile. It was false, but it spread like wildfire. Angela sobbed in my arms one evening, her voice breaking. "They think he hurt us. They think my husband is a monster, when it was my family who," she choked back the words. "This is all my fault. If I had stood up sooner." I held her face firmly. "Don't you dare blame yourself. Abusers thrive on silence." But she spoke up. That takes strength most people never find. Stephen, though silent, stood in the doorway, his shoulders heavy, but his eyes burning with resolve. He wasn't broken, not yet. But he was close. Joshua approached him later that night. "You can't just let this slide. The man's trying to erase you." Stephen exhaled sharply. "What would you have me do? Fight him in court? He has lawyers for lawyers." "Not court," Joshua said, his voice low. "The court of public opinion. He cares about his reputation more than anything. You take that from him, he'll crumble. Stephen hesitated. You mean go public? Tell people the truth. Joshua's grin was humorless. Exactly. We've got the recording. We've got witnesses. We show the world what kind of man Edward really is. Angela overheard them, her face stricken with fear. If you do that, he'll come after us harder. He won't stop until we're ruined. Joshua looked at her squarely. And if we don't, he wins. Do you really want your daughter to grow up thinking this is normal? That power means cruelty. That silence is safety. Angela flinched, her eyes flicking toward Abigail, who slept peacefully under the glow of the nightlight. The question hung in the air. The turning point came when Abigail was discharged from the hospital. We bundled her in warm clothes, careful not to let the cold touch her. As we wheeled her toward the hospital entrance, the winter wind biting at our faces, reporters swarmed the sidewalk. Cameras flashed. Microphones shoved forward. Mr. Harrison, is it true you endangered your daughter? Mrs. Harrison, do you have a statement about the allegations? Stephen froze, shielding Abigail instinctively. Angela's face crumpled under the barrage of accusations. And then through the crowd I saw him. Edward, standing tall, coat perfectly pressed, smile sharp as glass. Watching. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence screamed victory. I felt my blood boil. That man had orchestrated every moment, every rumor, every whisper. And now he wanted us to bow our heads and slink away in shame. But as the reporters shouted and Abigail whimpered against her father's chest, something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, my voice rising above the noise. You want the truth? Fine. Here it is. The cameras turned. The microphones pointed at me. Angela gasped. Mom, no. But it was too late. The dam had broken. I lifted my chin, my voice steady and loud enough for every recorder to catch. The night before Christmas Eve, I found my granddaughter freezing outside in the cold while her mother's family laughed and drank inside. Do you want to know who was responsible? Ask Edward Harrison. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Edward's smile faltered. For the first time, I saw cracks in his perfect mask. And just like that, the war became public. That night, the house was tense. Angela was pale, pacing the floor. Stephen sat silently, Abigail asleep on his chest. Joshua looked both satisfied and worried. You just painted a target on our backs, Angela whispered, her voice shaking. Do you know what you've done? Yes, I said, my hands trembling but resolute. I've told the truth, Joshua muttered. And the truth is the one thing Edward can't buy his way out of. Stephen finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Then we'd better be ready, because he's coming for us, harder than before. The storm outside rattled the windows. Snowflakes whipped against the glass like claws. And I knew, deep in my heart, that the final battle was upon us.